Hey, Facebook friends, Marianne here. I want to reach out to you today because, and I get prepared for it because this is going to be a rant. It has been an incredible number of days, a lot of unexpected, potential, awesome things in the mix that I cannot wait to share with many of you. But this is not necessarily going to be a positive post because I'm actually here to talk about something that's gone crazy in my country. It's not as if this is the first crazy thing that's happened, but what's really going on is what Trump did today. Of course, he's always doing nutty stuff, but this one was just really, really, really insane. And that is that he wants to compensate all of the November 6 people that were in jail that he freed. We're talking about people that killed an officer. We're talking about people that beat up and caused all sorts of problems of those officers. We're talking about people that love to wave the blue line flag and then turn around and support people that actually beat up or killed these officers. So we're talking about people that went into the White House and smeared their feces on the wall. We're talking about people that did all sorts of really icky things in the White House and carried the Confederate flag and white supremacist flags and flags with swastikas, things that represent things that our nation is proud to have defeated, like World War II and the Confederacy, things that stood for racism and the idea of a master race. And all those things are antithetical to the original vision of the United States of America. And for those of you that would say that I'm wrong, let me put things in perspective. Our founding fathers, if you go into Thomas Jefferson's beautiful, his memorial, you'll see on the wall, and he talks about the thing that he hopes the most for the descendants of the founding fathers, which are all of us citizens. He prayed that one day that we would look back on him and the other founding fathers and consider them antiquated. The reason why that was so important to him is he knew he was a slave owner. He knew that his wife wanted the right to vote. We have letters of the wives of founding fathers saying, "How come you're not getting me the right to vote?" You have things within the wills of the founding fathers freeing their slaves when they died, even though they weren't willing to do it when they were alive. This was our founding fathers recognizing they were flawed human beings, and they could see a future which one day would have progressed beyond what they themselves felt capable. But what they did believe they were fully capable of doing, and which I think they were, was that they created an opportunity for all of us, because they created a framework in the Constitution that said this is something that will enable humanity on this continent to evolve. And they even recognized the Native Americans as being the ones who inspired the form of our government. The three houses of government come from the Iroquois nation, which had united a federation of divided nations of Native Americans that had not previously gotten along. So when we understand all of these things, Deacon Rita, Hiawatha, those were the two Native Americans that helped bring about the Iroquois Confederacy. And originally, there was a House of Government for men, for women, and there was a mixture of the two, which were the elders. And they would come together, and our form of elders ended up being the Supreme Court. Women were left out of the mix originally, but the three houses of government, with a learned group of elders to help make the final decisions should things not be worked out peacefully any other way, that is directly derived from the Iroquois nation. So we owe them credit for basically coming up with the larger idea of how our government works. And our founding fathers wrote about this in their journals and their documents. So they understood we as a nation would be tasked with evolving ourselves as a society. Now, none of this should be anything new to any of you that have gone through your government class in high school or middle school. But here's the thing. When people get mired in the past, say, I want to bring back the 1800s, which is essentially what they're doing when they're talking about trying to get rid of women's rights, and all I can hear right now, I can hear all those trumpets out there going, they're not trying to do that. Don't exaggerate. Oh, yes, they are. The SAVE Act is doing anything but saving women's rights. They're talking about if a woman doesn't have the current legal name, her legal name isn't the same as her legal name upon her birth, then she can't vote. So, guess what that means? If you got married and you changed your name, you won't be able to vote. So, they're basing that on the idea of trying to help, encourage people to be transphobic. But in reality, there are much less trans people in our country than there are women. So they're relying on your hate to help them push this concept further along. And that brings back to this concept. Right now, as someone who is brown, my melanin would tell you that I am definitely opposed to anyone who tries to support Trump's idea of my entire race somehow dirtying the blood of America, which he has said about Hispanics. And, I would have every reason to pretty much loathe someone who is a MAGA supporter, because in my mind, a MAGA supporter is someone that even if they allow for the fact that Trump has said that my race is draining the blood of America and that ISIS harassing people like me and all this stuff, they still think that, okay, maybe your human rights are being taken away, but it's worth it. It's worth it. Well, the sad thing is that the more you allow your neighbor's rights to be taken away, the more you put your own at risk. And that means that someone like myself, if I meet, I'm looking out at you and you happen to be a die-hard Trump person, MAGA forever person, you are a Christian nationalist that thinks all other religions should be outlawed. If you think that your race, how did J.D. Vance say, that all our leaders should be led by white men, he should have said white straight men. But, if you are one of those people, a proud boy, for those that aren't in the United States, those are white supremacist misogynists. So if you are, one of those, okay, I still, as a bisexual brown-skinned woman, still need to absolutely be willing to defend your human rights and civil rights. Because if I support you losing your ability to speak your mind, to live your life, unhampered. Obviously, if you hurt somebody else, that should be hampered. But if I oppose your ability to exist peacefully as my neighbor, then I am actually endangering my own human rights and civil rights. And right now, with the SAVE Act, with the act that says that if your legal name is not the same as the legal name that you were born with, and they're doing that to get at trans people, trying to, fan the flames of transphobia. If you are really, really in support of that, because they're really tapping into your transphobia to push that along, in reality, there's so much fewer trans people in the country than there are women. You are actually endangering every married woman who has changed her name. You're endangering her ability to cast a vote. And maybe that's fine with you. But for most of us, that's not fine with us. We like our moms, we like our sisters, we like our daughters, our girlfriends. We wouldn't want to take that away from them. So maybe we're that biggest bigot in the world, trans hater. But you know what? If we have a woman in our lives that we care about, we should defend their rights. So that's how a sociopath should at least think. If you're only me and mine, I, only what affects me, well, guess what? Somebody else's ability to possess their human rights and their civil rights directly affects you. That's the way the law works. So when we take a look at all this, you can understand why I, as a bisexual, brown-skinned woman, am very irritated to see how people that claim to be all about the blue line, support our cops, and blah, 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 blah. And believe it or not, I have donated to cops over the years, to helping them, because I do appreciate them. I used to deal with, stalkers I had 3 stalkers by the time I had, I finished college. I've had reasons, I run away from an attempted gang rape. I have had reason. I've had knives held at my throat. I have reason to truly appreciate cops. And I have some as my friends. So believe me, I appreciate cops. But I'm also a progressive person who doesn't appreciate when people are harassed, when all this other stuff is going on. Which also brings up to the fact that right now, as ICE goes around our country and rounds up brown people with no explanation, and they wear these those black hoods that skiers wear, but it only shows the eyes and the little bit of nose and the mouth, their wearing that, and then they're all in, this weird kind of, kind of beige and brown, the rest of what they're wearing, except for these black hoods. And they can literally drive up in an unmarked van and nab you off the street and pull you in. And you don't know if you're being kidnapped by sex traffickers or by a government sanctioned thing. And they don't have to tell you anything about it. So, that's how ICE is often working. And what's really crazy is the party that says they support cops and all, they don't require ICE to tell the cops that they've taken somebody. So you have your local police force that has a limited amount of money to do what they need to do, and they get a frantic call from a parent, from a spouse, from a child saying, my daddy hasn't come home, my mommy's not here, my child didn't come home from school. I mean, people are terrified. All of these announcements I'm getting on my phone regularly, that are saying, hey, ding, 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 your phone rings and it says, child missing, child kidnapped, child. And when they don't know where they are, chances are quite often these days they're going to be a brown person. It's because I can just nab somebody and they don't have to tell the local cops, hey, if someone reports someone missing, that was us. So don't spend all that money and time looking all over for that person, because you won't find them, because we may have shipped them to El Salvador. I mean, they don't have to tell the cops anything. So they are definitely disrespecting the limited budget that cops have to do their job. So, when we start talking about this, I don't understand how people aren't seeing the relationship. So there's some of my rant. But here's the other thing, is if that wasn't disrespecting cops' time and energy and resources enough, disrespecting, I mean, well, today Trump has announced that all those people that marched into the White House carrying Nazi flags, Confederate flags, those things that we fought wars over and won, that just happen to have a lot of white supremacist mentality, all that stuff. And we know what side he's on, because he always said they were very fine people when they marched in Charlottesville with David Duke and, Stephen Miller and all that stuff. We know that they were doing all that, when he said the very fine people on both sides. No, but so it shouldn't be a surprise. But it still is a bit of a surprise when the president of your country says all the people he freed, that the president before him put in jail for smearing feces on the wall, or for, walking through the White House, calling out the name of the Speaker of the House, Nancy, because they have erected guillotine outside the White House. Hello, a guillotine? These things, carrying weapons with you into the White House, smearing feces on the wall, this is a bit of a threat. This is a bit of terrorism, breaking windows. They resulted in the death of a cop and many other cops who are physically horribly bruised, and others that have committed suicide because it was such a horrendous experience in their lives. This is both directly and indirectly lives were lost. They were put in jail because these are the people, not all the people who participate, but these are the people who directly caused the most damage on January 6th. He wants to compensate them. Let me say that again. He wants to give money to the people that smeared their poop on the walls of the White House. And I know that people don't like to use the word sacred for something that isn't religious or spiritual, but there is something spiritual about what the White House meant for our nation, because it was a clarion call, a challenge by our founding fathers to say, I know that we do not necessarily have what it takes in this moment in time to be everything that humanity hopes to be. But it makes me think of like when my father gave me a little acorn and he said, see this acorn? This became that tree. And I looked at the acorn and I looked at it, oh my God, because it was amazing. Well, that's the same kind of thing, because he said, how that acorn became that. It spent his whole life reaching to touch the sun, and it will never touch the sun. But in the process of striving for it, it became that gorgeous oak tree. Similarly, we as a society will strive and strive and strive to become this beautiful vision that our founding fathers had. And we will probably never do it because human beings are flawed. But as long as we are on the path to striving to be that thing, that beautiful vision for humanity, that of all of us, all our diversity, and it was already a diverse nation when our founding fathers were there. Did you know that many of the slaves were Muslim, that were trafficked, essentially kidnapped, trafficked, and enslaved into the United States? Many were Muslim. We had Native Americans who had their own indigenous beliefs. We had a diversity of Christian beliefs. We actually had Jews that came over too. And then among the Christians, you have Quakers, you had Catholics. Point is that It's always been diverse. And before a white man ever stepped on this land, we already had diversity among the different nations. And there was an understanding and a memory among Native Americans that all four races of man would come together once again on this land. And they had a memory of having known they existed. So, the reason why I share any of this is that there was an understanding of diversity. The idea that we were founded as a Christian nation only when our very houses of government were based on the Iroquois Confederacy's example. And we have within the journals, our founding fathers, proof that they based it on that because they say so. When we have our very own Washington, D.C. was made possible because the white man that was hired to do it quit. And so it was this slave that was a genius and did it all from memory and added his own designs. That's right. Washington, D.C. is designed by a slave. So when we take a look at all of the races that contributed to the United States of America, and yes, that includes my race, because guess what? Hispanics, Latinos, are the only race being referred to by our language. You don't call, any of the other races by the language they speak. Latin means you either spoke Portuguese or French or Spanish. It was the language of conquerors, of conquistadors, of slavers that came in, and people learned their language and it became the dominant language. Learning a language does not change your race. If I learn to speak French, it doesn't turn me white. Let me say again, if I learn to speak French, it doesn't turn me white. So I'm a Native American whose ancestors were invaded by people from Spain. People up in Canada were Native American who were invaded by people from France. Guess what? It didn't change who we are. We're the same race. So when you see all this unfolding, you realize that, hello, there are a lot of Native Americans. So people are so worried about the browning of America. It's always been brown. Native Americans were here. So all of this hate that's coming at everybody, and the fact that they try and trick you by saying, as I mentioned earlier, that, ooh, let's tap into your transphobia so that we can push away, the rights over here, because they won't notice we're chipping away at women over here by saying, hey, let's pass the SAVE Act so that if your current legal name doesn't match your birth name, you won't be able to vote. Yeah, this is where you can stick it to those trans people. Again, if you are a MAGA, white supremacist minded person, I, as a bisexual brown woman, still need to care about your human rights and your civil rights. And you know what? You better care about mine, because if we don't, this incredible vision that our founding fathers had will not last. People don't realize the city on a hill was a biblical construct, and it came out of this vision of how the children of Abraham, would have this vision of Israel, but inside them, a change of consciousness. That's where that comes from. And we will only get there, for those that argue that we're a biblical nation. You go back to the Ark of the Covenant, you can only have the Holy Spirit, the Shekhinah, sitting among man when we can recognize our common humanity. So America, we need to recognize our common humanity, and we need to hold each other accountable, because our president sure isn't, especially when he's saying, hey, let's reward those people that hurt people, that destroyed the sacred structure of our capital, that smeared their feces on the wall. Let's give them extra money. And meanwhile, let's ship out the people who are dirtying the blood of America. And if you support him, essentially you're supporting the destruction of the vision of America and nothing less, because that's what this is a perfect example of. How demeaning it is to being a patriot and being American, and to loving the vision and being loyal to what our founding fathers said, to say that you will reward people that smeared feces on the walls of the Capitol. How demeaning it is to women to think that we will be stupid enough to buy into this SAVE Act and sign our human rights away. How demeaning it is to all of us as a society to allow public education to disappear. Do you realize that what he is doing is trying to create a slave class by ensuring ignorance, ensuring people don't know what their rights are, and what the heritage, the sacred heritage and responsibility that's been given to all of us as citizens? We have an opportunity to do amazing things together as a country. And I want to be part of that future, and I know you do too. So America, wake up. If this last thing Trump has tried to do doesn't wake you up, I don't know what will.